We are ready? We are on. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Your mic might be.
I have the white light on.
Sounds like good.
Good afternoon again. Okay.
Sorry.
Testing.
Welcome to the meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. Meetings are broadcast live on cable channel 6 and rebroadcast throughout the week. Anybody interested for more information or programming, they can call 818-548-4013. The videotapes are also available at the City Clerk's office, and you can inquire about them from the City Clerk's office. Now, roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here.
Commissioner Shire. Here. Commissioner Vidor. Here. And Chairman Amirian.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Thursday, October 18, 2010, on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Approval of the minutes of September 27. Any comments on the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Yes,
Actually,
please.
one of them is on page 3D. I think it should say issues, not issued.
Which paragraph is that?
D.
E and then
Mr. J. Platt reported the city attorney has no issued with the commissioners participating in the community.
you're correct.
And tell me, what's CA? Is that city attorney?
Yes.
Another item, I'm not sure with your statement on B. Commissioner Martin requests staff to add a discussion on solar panels, hedges, designated property building, and Mr. J. Platt stated that the landscape features under Commission's jurisdiction only if they're specifically called out in historical documentation.
What page are you reading, Mr. Mardian?
Number 2. Under solar panel, yeah. What exactly you mean there? Are we gonna?
I had mentioned during the meeting that for designated properties, the only landscape features that we would regulate are things that are called out in the designation report, like a special tree of some sort or some ornamental plantings that we think have historic importance. I think you might have been focusing, and we haven't said that we wouldn't discuss this in the future. You were thinking more, I think, of hedges and things that might obscure the view
The
properties?
Of the properties, the ones that are designated now.
Yeah, and I think we still have that on our list of commissioner
Discussion? Okay, that's
discussion
all.
items. Yeah, landscaping that blocks views to historic properties.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other comments?
Chair, I have one thing to add. The time at the beginning was called to order not at 5:08 p.m., probably 2.
Wow.
Turn that upside down and we're okay.
Any other comments? No? Okay.
With those corrections, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 27, 2010.
Second?
Second.
To do a roll call on this? Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian.
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan.
Yes.
Commissioner Shire.
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor.
Yes.
And Chairman Amirian.
Yes. Oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The chairman may question the speaker, the commission rather, may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Anybody like to make comments or?
Comments, the time when one can suggest an agenda item for a future date,
But
or
this is the public comment period.
Oh, public comment, okay.
Okay.
Nothing?
There is no volunteer to speak. We move on to item number 5, commissioners' comments. Anybody would like to comment on anything?
Commissioner Morgan has words he'd like to share.
Yes.
Also-
I would like to make a few words for two people that passed on this last month. The city of Glendale and the Crescenta Valley and historians everywhere lost two friends this last month. Sid Gordon, who picture is up there now. Sid moved to the Crescenta Valley when he was 14. He was in the second graduating class of Crescenta Valley High and worked at JPL for 20 years. Sid was much loved in the community for his volunteer activities in many local organizations. He was an early member of the Glendale Historical Society and was part of the group that saved the doctor's house. He spent many years of his life restoring the house and was always there for their public events, dressed in period costume and playing old music for visitors on his vintage wind-up photographs. He was a member of a couple of local car clubs and loved his fully restored 36 Buick Special. He was a founding member of the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley and spent the last few years of his life volunteering at their activities. But Sid was first and foremost a collector, was well known for owning and displaying his amazing collection of antique photographs and records, vintage fountain pens, grandfather clocks, old radios, and most especially troll dolls. The other person we lost this week is Charles Bosbeck. He was born in 1922, and he came to the Crescenta Valley in 1928 when he was all of 6 years of age. His dad ran a restaurant at the Burbank Airport, so young Charles got to hang out with all the famous early aviators, such as Eddie Rickenbacker, Roscoe Turner, and Amelia Earhart. His family was cut off from the rest of the world during the New Year's flood of 1934, and the Red Cross actually had them listed as among the dead before they were able to report in. The Bosbecks were of German ancestry and frequented Hindenburg Park for the huge German cultural celebrations. All of this is remarkable in itself, but in Charles' case, it was combined with a photographic memory and a gift for storytelling. With this talent and good researching skills, he served as researcher for the Huell-Hauser California Gold Program for many years and is still listed in the credits at the end of each show. He gave freely of his many memories to the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley, and his knowledge of CV history formed their knowledge base. And for me personally, they were very good friends, and I will miss them dearly. And I'd like to ask if, at the end of the day, if we could adjourn the meeting in their memory.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have a couple of items. I first want to thank the Historical Society for a great tour for another year, and I hope they continue doing that. And I have three other items, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if I should put it under consideration of Commissioners-generated proposals or comments. If you allow me, I may just touch briefly on the comments. Evening meeting versus daytime meeting on the commission meetings. And also, when I was in Michigan at the conference, and I forgot to mention to you, we discussed the chairman's term. There were a few discussions, and I want to discuss the term of the chairmanship and to designate also a pro tem, because we don't do that now. And lastly, Mr. Chair, if we do ex parte any prior communication or to disclose any communication prior to an application with an applicant.
Okay. Now, you want those to be agendized for discussion?
Well, if we may, we can agendize it, or what should we do should we start doing it under consideration of commission-generated proposal? Are these are these mostly rules and regulations of our commission? I mean, do we have the authority to get into these?
Yeah, the commission, for several of these at least, the commission, it's in your capacity to kind of change your policy in terms of a vice chair or pro tem chair. Some of the other ones we'd have to talk to the city attorney about. Changing the schedule, we'd have to consider, there are many boards and commissions meetings, so kind of everyone has a time slot, so we'd even have to see if that was a possibility.
So the reason I mentioned that, because most of our commissions meetings are starting in the evening now. I think we're the only ones, we're the few ones that are starting.
There are a few other commissions that meet in the afternoon. I think the primary issue is simply airtime and availability of rooms to meet in the evening. But I guess the question is, are you wanting to put this on the table to ask why we don't meet in the evening?
Yeah, why don't we do it in the evening? I think that also goes back to Commissioner Vito. This will be more open to the evening, more public.
Why don't we do this?
Oh,
You mentioned about outreach.
This is something we can't discuss now.
Never mind.
Yeah,
But this is a good time. We're still working on this commissioner comment, how we're going to take that. The commissioner comment period could be a good time to introduce the comments, let your colleagues consider it, and then at the next meeting, or perhaps if it's something everyone thinks is important at this meeting, if there's a second person who agrees, then we'll put it on the list and agendize it for the next hearing.
Thank you.
that would be okay with you?
That's
So in other words, what the questions that you raised, we'll discuss under commissioner requests in a few minutes. Then, if we agree, we'll put it on the agenda.
Yeah, if there's support, then we'll put it on the agenda.
Okay. Any other comments from, yes, please.
I'm not sure this is a comment, or even if it's appropriate for this time. I'd like to request that something be agendized at a future meeting. Would that be new business or commissioner comment?
It kind of, well, does it fit into the commissioner comment where it's an issue you want to have discussion, or is it
No, I don't
something-
want any discussion now. It's impossible. Well, I'll throw it out, and you can say, talk about that later. I would like to request that at some future date, not too far in the future, we agendize a formal status report on the status of the Brand Library renovation and retrofitting. I've heard various things about the status of the project, and I've also heard about some delays, and there seems to be a lot of different conflicting information out there, and, you know, it's an important building, so I thought maybe we could get a formal update.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I think you can just request, and we'll give
Okay.
an update on that. That on for next month.
Any other comment? I like to kind of talk about the house tour that the Historical Society had organized. I believe it was last week or a couple of weeks ago. It was an outstanding tour. The houses were very beautiful. It was very well organized. But it's kind of unfortunate that our public does not know enough about it, or we do not have the culture to attend. Later on, I spoke with John. There has been very few people who attended that. I asked him if he has time to organize a slideshow, and we make this a forum for him to come and present it, what happened with the houses and what. So I like to kind of thank like Mr. Mardian, the Historical Society, but I would also like to see how we as a commission can help the word to be spread out widely. So, not only the last tour was good, whatever they had organized, I tried to attend. All of them have been very good. We have beautiful buildings in Glendale, and it's shame that not too many people see those. So I wanted to say that. And there was other thing that I would like to mention. I don't know whether it's the place to do that or not. It's regarding the fee that the Historical Society attached to each individual who goes there. I thought that I'm going to suggest that when I see John. I thought it was too high. $30 is a lot of money nowadays.
This is kind of a discussion that I don't think is appropriate for the commission to be suggesting what a nonprofit group would charge for an admission.
No wonder you are sitting there.
I usually don't jump in like that, but I just got a sense that this wasn't right. So.
I just wanted lots of people to go there, and if they can kind of spread the word throughout the universities that have architectural school or urban design school for the students to come with. Anyway,
I think your first point about offering them the opportunity to come to a hearing to kind of advertise and get people interested in their events, I think that's perfectly good use of our time in the oral comments section. So.
Very good, very good. Okay. If there are no other comments, we move on. Old business. Consideration of commissioner-generated proposals for future discussions regarding HPC policies and goals. So, where do we stand on that?
We've added to our list the two recent discussions that Commissioner Mardian brought up about solar panel installations and the landscaping that might block views. And then we have 4 other items that Commissioner Vidor had brought up. These are all the ones that are waiting for kind of someone else on the commission to second, and that's when that's the mechanism that agendizes the items. And then at the bottom, we have broken this into 3 sections now. So we have the proposed topics, agendized topics, and resolved topics. Ultimately, the resolved topics will probably fall off the list, but we're going to definitely keep the proposed topics and then any ongoing discussion topics right up at the top. So this is the commission's time to, for either sponsors or for other commissioners to indicate interest or to, possibly raise other items. And then we can also, if anyone is interested in the items Commissioner Mardian brought up just now, then we can also put those on. So.
Okay.
I would like to second a few.
Which one?
I'd like to second one of the new ones that Vic Mardian mentioned, which was evening meetings and disclosure of information with property owners that are bringing their properties forward on historic status, as well as the citywide survey for future discussion.
How about Brand Library?
Well, that's
Brand Library is going to be more of an update on the plan with kind of major projects going on designated buildings is that we often just bring it to you without even your asking, just to give you an update on that. So we'll definitely, that's going to be one of our biggest projects. So, Commissioner Shire, for the second item about the discussions with applicants,
he was
for both
talking
of
about
you.
disclosing when you may have an interest in or relationship with or something that may preclude you from not being neutral, I think, for historic applications. Is that what you were speaking about?
That and also when, let's say when we get a staff report and within that period of before the hearing we have communication with the applicant or they try to contact us to discuss their project. And what I was going with that, if I may, Mr. And that should be, I don't know, if she's second, we can discuss it later, is that should take place prior of the hearing of that case.
Of course.
We'll put all 3 of those will now be on the agendized topics.
I would like to second the consideration of interior features that Arlene brought up, Commissioner Vidor.
What I'll do for something like citywide survey, I think we'll just agendize it, take discussion from the commissioners, and then we'll see how we're going to proceed with that, whether it becomes a recommendation to council or if it's something we keep in the department. The others, I think I'm just thinking out loud about all of these will fit on an agenda, and I don't see any reason why not. So, all in the next.
You think we can get them all on the next agenda?
To introduce the discussion,
Okay.
I don't think we're going to resolve some of them.
I was thinking ex parte and evening meetings. We could probably easily just tell you what's status of those and your obligations. The other 2 seems like they might require a little extra
The other
work.
more policy discussions that could take a while. So, system seems to be working.
All right.
Yeah, I would like actually one more. The one that Arlene did on the effects of craftsman survey regarding designation demolition.
Okay. That one will just be a staff report. And I believe Commissioner Vidor was looking for some figures in terms of how many applications have come in. Is that correct? Or
Applications for the craftsman?
For altering or demolishing craftsmen since the survey was completed?
Yes, I kind of envision this, I don't want to get into a discussion here, but I envision this item as being kind of a not too often but periodic update to see how effective the survey process is in Glendale. Because we know surveys don't always have, the teeth of law behind them, and, there are a lot of buildings in this survey that were categorized in a very nebulous way, so that there's still judgment call involved. So it's just to monitor it and see what the prevailing activity is.
Okay. My thought on that one is there's a chance we'll have to put that into January, depending on how the agenda looks and how much work that looks like it would be, but definitely in the next one or two hearings, we can do it.
For clarification, Mr. Chair, did we have a second on solar panel and landscaping?
I did not hear a second at this meeting. Yeah.
None of them?
Oh. Can I second, please?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to...
The system has gone out of control.
It's just crazy now. Okay. But that doesn't
Too many
mean,
items.
if they're seconds, that doesn't mean they have to be handled within the next X number of meetings,
No.
right? They can be queued
That's
up.
my hope.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. I would like to second both of them. They're both interesting topics.
The landscaping and?
And, yeah, is there any way we can make the landscaping a little more general? Like, include the blockage issue, but also talk about, are there already guidelines anywhere codified about how landscaping and historic designation is handled?
It's in the ordinance, it's handled as identified historic features. So what we're trying to do, the city doesn't regulate
Okay.
landscaping in general, except in terms of drought-tolerant landscaping, but we don't tell people, what kind of bush they can put in. We don't
Okay.
want this commission to be getting to that
No,
point
no.
either. So we want it to really just be things that we think, when we're designating properties, have a historic connection to the property itself. In historic districts, it's different because the district looks at all kind of neighborhood landscape and hardscape features. For example, the palm trees in Royal Boulevard are identified as character-defining features of the neighborhood, so we're covered that way in the districts.
Okay, but people aren't required to identify any heritage landscaping on their property if they're designating. That can just be completely left off
Yes.
at their discretion. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll second
sorry.
both of them.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, I envision this report simply being a statement on kind of what our current practice is and maybe what some of our peer cities are doing, and
Yeah,
best practices and preservation law.
best
and that's-
practices on landscaping, yeah, including blocking. Okay, I second.
Anybody else on this item? Okay. Shall we move on? Item number 7, new business, proposed North Cumberland Heights Historic District preliminary review information. And nomination, I'm sorry.
Okay, we're excited to bring to the commission the what is fifth in line in our historic districts. We have 3 designated historic districts as of today. We have 1 proposed district that the commission has taken under consideration in the Ross Moines neighborhood, and this is our next district that we'll be considering, which is the proposed North Cumberland Heights Historic District. Several of the applicants and residents of the neighborhood here to share their enthusiasm with the commission, and I just wanted to give everyone a rundown on kind of what we're looking at in this area. North Cumberland, as proposed, North Cumberland Heights as proposed, is going to encompass all of the properties you see in this map, basically everything straddling Cumberland Road at the south, Grandview Avenue at the west, Mountain Street at the north, and over on the east, and then would include Crestview Avenue, Matilaha, and several blocks of Cumberland Road, as well as several blocks of Idlewood, Ben Lomond, and Portland. It's 179 houses, and you, I'm sure, are familiar with the neighborhood from all of the work that we've done there over the years. You can see this is a good chunk of the northern section of the Cumberland Heights district that was proposed in 2004 and then withdrawn. To the right, in the dark outline, you can see the boundary of Ardeven Highlands, which is already designated with 87 properties. So this will significantly bring the Cumberland Heights neighborhood as originally proposed into historic district status if it were to pass. It's a very similar process that we expect to happen here as we had with Ardeven Highlands, because we have a survey that was done of the bigger Cumberland Heights neighborhood in 2004 That survey is now technically out of date in preservation survey terms, but what we don't need to do is restart the process from the beginning. We have the historic context of the neighborhood fairly well fleshed out, and we have what's called DPR forms, the state survey forms for every property in the proposed district have already been prepared. What we're going to need to do with this district is do an update of that survey to see if any changes have happened to any of the houses that would change their status in terms of whether they contribute to the district or don't contribute to the district. And then ultimately, the commission is going to make its decision based on what it sees on the ground today, obviously. That survey, we're not sure at this point if it will be able to be handled by staff or if we're going to have a consultant come in. We're going to explore different methods with several of our upcoming historic districts to reduce costs as much as possible and still get the quality of surveys and historic context that we need. So this drawing also shows you just a sense of the dates of the properties in the area. This was land that was originally owned to a large extent by the Campbell brothers, Dan and Arthur, who we're familiar with from Dan's ownership of Art Even and both of their associations with Leslie Brand. So these were former orchards that were slowly developed, well, actually rapidly developed in some cases starting in the 1920s. So you can see the green color represents homes built from the 20s, and then also development continued into the 30s. But as with Art Even Highlands and Cumberland Heights in general, we have houses from different periods. So the period of significance that's been proposed by the district proponents takes us all the way from the first property that was built in the neighborhood, which is 1910, through, actually I'm not sure, I think we're starting in 1923 when the subdivisions were made. So there's one property that was moved into the area, and then stopping in 1955. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. This is a map that was put together for the Cumberland Heights survey just to show how complicated the development was here. And this is in a real stark contrast to the development of Rossmoyne, where the entire Rossmoyne neighborhood was one tract, subdivided by one company, and developed under kind of a consistent sense of design and layout. Art Even Highlands and then Cumberland Heights and now North Cumberland Heights are more typical of what happened in most of Glendale, with smaller tracts being subdivided and then developed for single-family home development starting in the 20s when we were just booming as a city. The area that we're looking at is everything above the dark arrows at the top. The horizontal arrow running through the middle is Cumberland Street. Everything above that, and then the houses that come just south from that line. And what's interesting is when we look and see how much of this land was actually developed by the Campbells, you can see a large tract at the bottom that was Arthur Campbell, two tracts over on the north and then the west that were Dan Campbell, a large tract that was subdivided by the Frances family, but Dan Campbell was the notary on the transaction. So there's just a lot of activity with the Campbell family, and I think there's a very strong association with the Campbells for this historic district. This is just to show you how Art Even Highlands had a very similar pattern of kind of patchwork quilt of tract developments that led to very consistent streetscapes. That's what's kind of amazing about development of that period, is architects were really working in several period revival styles, but developing very consistent neighborhoods that really had a lot of character that looked like they may have been developed all at the same, or by the same people. The proponents have highlighted some of the styles of the houses that are in the neighborhood, and I think we're used to this mix and match of pretty much all of the major period revivals. Spanish colonial, Mediterranean, Monterey revival. There's American colonial revival in the neighborhood. The picture that was in the nomination was not an American colonial revival house, so I took that out. You should know that they're in there. French eclectic, a smattering, not a lot of these. There's also Tudor revivals, including smaller examples like this and some grander examples. And then just like in Art Even Highlands, we have the development from the 40s and into the 50s kind of reflected the changes in just American development during that period, especially after the war. And we have good examples of the minimal traditional style and also the ranch styles in the neighborhood. So when staff was reviewing this, we thought that this neighborhood really does obviously have the consistency and the sense of districtness that we expect from districts in Glendale. We feel that because Ardeven Highlands has made it through the process and that Cumberland Heights has already been vetted, that this neighborhood has been looked at consistently by both independent consultants and the commission over several years to recognize that it's a special part of Glendale. There are a few individual properties within this district that are of note, and this is one of them. This was Leslie Brand's niece, Ada Dryden Thompson, had this house built in 1913, and this is the one that I believe this house was moved onto the site, so it's not part of the original development, and it's been altered, but it's definitely a property of interest. Ada Dryden was also the daughter of Nathaniel Dryden. Granddaughter or daughter? Now I'm blanking on that. But related to Nathaniel Dryden, who's the architect of the house Ardeven, as well as the Grand Library House El Miradero. Casey Stengel, baseball player and manager, and noted Glendale guy, lived here. And then this has the house of Robert Jensen, of the Jensen family, of the Jensen Entertainment Center, or Recreation Centers, and we'll be seeing more of this house later today with an individual designation. Staff has gone through not only the eligibility criteria, but also considered the period of significance that the applicants have proposed, as well as the proposed boundary and the proposed name for the district. Thinking about the boundary, it has borders that pretty much, let me just jump back to that, reflect the original boundaries that were proposed for Cumberland Heights on all sides except at the south side. And the south side boundary is a very defensible boundary under preservation standards because it encompasses both sides of the street, gives a sense of character on both sides, and protects from alterations on one side of a street that isn't designated from affecting the designated side across the way. So the boundary itself, we think, is a solid and good boundary. The name that was proposed of North Cumberland Heights seems completely logical and appropriate. I think at some point we will have to address if we have 3 or 4 or more contiguous historic districts in what used to be known as the Cumberland Heights neighborhood. We'll have to see what happens with that, if we have 4 districts or not. But for now, that's the way we're going to have to take it. And then the period of significance proposed by the applicants is 1923 to 1950. And that's the hardest part to think about at this time because we still don't know how many houses are contributors or non-contributors in the district. The trick with this one is that when Cumberland Heights was surveyed, the consultant chose 1955 as their cutoff date for the period of significance. And what we would need to do through the resurvey or the survey update is kind of really look at the construction dates of the houses and to see if there's any marked difference between what ended in 1950 and what ended in 1955 and see what makes sense for this. So that's something that would happen either by the consultant would do that or we would do that at staff level if it goes that way. In terms of contributing structures in the neighborhood, using the numbers we have from the Cumberland Heights survey, 150 out of the 179 properties were contributors, which is 84%, which is a really high number. I don't expect that's going to change dramatically, but I'm sure it will change after we do the survey update. But the ordinance actually calls just for 60%. Well above that, and I expect that we'll stay well above that. And skipping ahead to the eligibility criteria, the district appears to meet many of our criteria, and I'll just quickly run through those so that we're all keeping them fresh in mind as you're considering this. And these are, of course, staff recommendations, so if the commission feels that a criterion that isn't listed here should be, we can talk about that, or if one might not work for you as a commission. So criterion A, we believe that it exemplifies special elements of the city's cultural, social, economic, political, aesthetic, and not so much engineering and architectural history, but definitely it tells us a lot about how people lived, how the city developed, what our tastes were, and what our aesthetic choices were throughout the early decades of the city's development. For criterion B, we think that the Campbell brother connection is a very strong connection here, and that because of that, the district is identified with people who are significant in local, state, national history, and the Campbell brothers were clearly a deeply significant figure locally. Criterion C, the district appears to embody distinctive characteristics of a style, type, or method of construction, or is a valuable example of the use of indigenous materials. Not so much that last part, but certainly the first part, where when you go drive these streets, there's this real sense of place that comes from the houses that were built there and the styles that were used. We can't say that it meets criterion D for any notable builders, designers, or architects. It was really, like I said, developed in kind of a piecemeal fashion. A lot of talented designers obviously were working in the area, but there's no one vision that kind of guided that development. Criterion E, the district could have a unique location or a view or vista representing established and familiar visual neighborhood, community, or city. Even though it is a distinctive neighborhood and there are nice views from there, it doesn't seem like it meets that criterion. And the same goes for F, embodying a collection of elements of architectural design, detail, materials, or craftsmanship that represent a significant structural or architectural achievement or innovation. And again, these houses tend to be very beautiful, very well-designed houses, but not jumping out as significant structural or architectural as a group. Criterion G, we definitely think it meets this one in that it reflects significant geographical patterns, including those associated with different eras of settlement and growth, transportation modes, or distinctive examples of park or community. I think the connection with the Campbells and then also their direct connection with Leslie Brand is interesting here because this is kind of a classic streetcar suburban development pattern. And of course, Brand brought the streetcar to the city and the Campbells were involved with that process as well. Criterion H, we believe it also meets, conveys a sense of historic and architectural cohesiveness through its design, setting, materials, workmanship, or association. This is kind of the key criterion of all of these in terms of historic districts. If something didn't meet this, I don't know that we could call it a historic district, but this neighborhood definitely seems to meet that. And then criterion I, this district has not been recognized as a National Register or California Register district. It doesn't meet that. So with that, I'm finished with the staff presentation. Available for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from?
Question.
Please do.
Sure, why not? On the, there's mention about a resurvey, the 6-year-old survey, which is still probably very valid, but I assume that the resurvey would include any gaps where properties that were potential contributing structures would be identified as having been remodeled or...
Yeah, well, what either the consultant or staff would do is the entire neighborhood would be rephotographed, re-experienced, permit histories would be checked. Anytime there was an obvious deviation from what was there in the Cumberland Heights survey, we would check permit histories to make sure, that we know the full story of what happened at those properties. And then we'd reassess new status codes if we need to, which means a contributing structure might become a non-contributing structure if it was really altered. What we found with Ardeven Highlands was that there were a few houses that we actually bumped up into status because there was some questions about the original survey and, some of the judgments that were made there that had been made at an earlier point. So the possibility can go either way, up to contributing or down from.
Could you explain the discrepancy of the 1950 versus 1955, what the reason for that was?
I think it was the applicant's choice, and I actually can't address that, but you might ask the applicants when they're up. I don't see it being a major issue, though, in terms of something that will definitely resolve through the.
Any other comments? I thought the report was very.
Chair, if I jump back one question, go back to F, what, if I may.
Criterion F.
What was the rationale again for not meeting F?
This seems to be one that is looking, I think the key part of this is representing significant structural or architectural achievement or innovation. And that the houses are, very typical of construction of the 20s and 30s, and I don't see that they make a jump into that level.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall we move on? have someone who... Anybody presenting this as far as the applicants are concerned?
No, I think you have speaker cards. And
I do not have any speaker cards.
oh, I'm sorry, they weren't submitted. Bring them on.
Are these put in order or doesn't make any difference?
Gloria, did you want to go first?
Gloria?
Gloria?
Good afternoon. My name is Gloria Sander, and I've had the pleasure of being a resident in Glendale since 1998 with my family. And we've really enjoyed learning about the neighborhood over the years. I want to tell you that I am one of the signers for this application, but I would like to underscore that this was a long process, which we learned through everything from book clubs, barbecues, dog walking, and the various things that one does in a neighborhood from different neighbors on different blocks, that there was interest in establishing a historic district because there was a recognition of the specialness of the domestic architecture and the harmony of the neighborhood. So with that in mind, over the last couple of years, we slowly put together a plan, and last November we started in earnest canvassing our other neighbors to see what the interest was, and we received very favorable feedback. This is by way of saying that although there are 3 signers, as is required, it's a very substantive group of people who are very interested in your examining and hopefully supporting our request for a historic overlay for North Cumberland Heights. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Farkas? Am I reading the name right?
Yes.
Okay.
You didn't butcher it.
That was a beautiful job. Hi, my name is Robert Farkas, and I'm a new resident here. My wife and I moved from Chicago in March, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Platt. Our home is at 850 Cumberland Road. It is called the Lombardi House. It's protected under the Mills Act, so Mr. Platt's looked at it. And I wanted to say that we have had a number of visitors to the area. We just moved in 2 weeks ago. And people are just astounded by the neighborhood. They had no idea that Glendale had neighborhoods such as the Art Even district and this district, and just a lot of the areas that are north of Kenneth. Ours is a 1929 Spanish colonial revival home. I've seen other homes of that nature. In fact, my sister-in-law also has a historic home that's a Spanish colonial revival that's not in the proposed district. But I think that having this district is a great thing for the area. It sort of, I was disappointed to find out that mine wasn't, since I'm 1 block from Art Even, that I wasn't in the Art Even district. But I think it gives you an additional measure of pride, almost like homeownership gives you a measure of pride, that you're in a historical district and that you'd want to maintain the historical pattern. Anyway, I'm an ardent supporter, and I appreciate the chance to address you and hope to meet you in the future since we are new residents. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Jerry Jones.
Hi, I hadn't planned on actually speaking, but just wanted to say Robert Farkas is my husband. I live at 850 Cumberland Road as well, and of all the places, we looked for over a year to find a home that we loved, and we didn't see anything that we loved nearly as much, and we love the neighborhood as we did here in Glendale. and it's charming and beautiful, and we love that people walk their dogs at night at 8 p.m. and we love the mix of homes, and I mean I just love walking the neighborhood and seeing the different examples that you saw here, and it is really beautiful and we love it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I have a card here that I know that I will murder the name. I apologize ahead of time. Zurka Egena. Or Egena. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Zurka Egena. My husband Peter is over here. We live at 1724 Cleveland Road. We bought our house in 1973. This is our first house, and we're still there, because we haven't found a nicer neighborhood. When we bought it, we liked the friendliness, the warmth of the neighborhood. And we also liked the variety of architectural styles. It wasn't Levittown. There were different styles, but they all fit together in a cohesive manner. We both originally come from cities where neighborhoods are hundreds of years old. The buildings are old. We come back and we feel at home. Everything looks the same, even though the infrastructure and the interiors have been updated and modernized. So we really hope to keep our neighborhood, more or less what it is, that it won't change, and that when our grandchildren come back, when they're grown up, they also feel at home and won't be lost. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Absolutely, yes.
I just wanted to introduce someone to the Commission. Kristen Asp is one of our senior planners, and she's going to be working with me through the process for North Cumberland, and assuming there is a process and a vote today to move forward. And I just wanted to share that this is the department's policy. We're trying to bring planners who don't necessarily have a background in preservation into kind of more active work dealing with districts and individual designations, so that we can all kind of get experience of what we're all doing in the same department. So that's Kristen.
Very good. Nice to meet you. Nice meeting you. My daughter lives on Virginia Avenue, and I seize the opportunity as many times as I can to go and walk their dogs. So I am familiar with walking the dogs there. I do that often, though I don't live. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you all. Now, how are we going to proceed? Are we going to take a vote on this thing?
Discussion, or?
Yeah, after discussion. Any discussion as far as...
Well, I agree with Jay's assessment report. I think it was very thorough, and the criteria you selected make sense to me, and so I'm just validating the accuracy of your report.
I concur with Commissioner Vidor that it's a very historic area. I drove it yesterday, but I've had friends that lived on Cleveland for many, many, many years, so I walked it quite a few times too, and it's very contiguous, and it's delightful. I mean, it's just not one area. They're all different types of houses. It's just unique. Everywhere you turn, there's something new and interesting and great. And yesterday afternoon, while driving around, you could see the people walking their dogs, and they had a garage sale and all sorts of little stuff, and it was very interesting. It's everything that you'd want in a historic district. I mean, it's really alive, and I think it's a great thing for the city of Glendale.
I just wanted to commend the residents for your passion and dedication. I know it's a long process, and we really appreciate you bringing it forward. And yeah, I concur with staff's report.
I concur also with my colleagues. I think this area is the heart and soul of old Glendale, with the Campbells and Leslie Brand. I think this is the final, not the final, but part of the puzzle that should have been done many years ago, and finally it's back again, and I appreciate your effort, process, and I hope, support this today.
I like to echo my colleagues' statements. I am very much in support of moving the project forward and designating the district as historical district. Thank you all.
If I may add one more thing, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you always add one more thing.
Okay, I'm sorry. I like these criterias, actually. These are my... I'm a, although I'm overwhelmed that it meets the 5 criterias, but I thought this F would meet it too. Embodies elements of architecture. The heart and soul of the Spanish revival is there. These are craftsmanship that cannot be duplicated, so it was an achievement, to my opinion. I think we should add criteria F in there. I'm not disagreeing with staff. I think staff has done a wonderful job, but I think F should be added in the criteria if anybody supports that. I'm ready to support it without it also. So
Okay.
I thought it should be included in there.
All right. Anybody would like to add that? If you are going to add that, you have to have a long discussion, sure that it goes aye or you're okay with it, we just...
Move on.
Okay. All right. Yeah, but I have closed already the public hearing.
You received one card afterwards.
Yeah.
You have the option to reopen it, but you don't have to. So.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to give you only 2 minutes, Mr. Ovanesian, and starts right now.
As you're walking.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Rubik Ovanesian. I happen to live in the Cumberland Heights District, and our case is later this afternoon. And Mr. Platt and I, we have talked about the proposed Cumberland Heights District, and he asked for my support. At the present time, we are in support of it as well. And I'll make some calls to make sure this time it goes through. That's a few years back. It was proposed when much larger and had some issues and didn't go through. Thank you.
That's all? You have not finished your 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay. Anybody would like to make a motion to move the project?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair, that the proposed North Cumberland Heights District, let me read the actual,
Yes, please.
sorry. Based on the information submitted with the nomination, we find that the proposed North Cumberland Heights District is eligible as a historic district overlay zone, unauthorized the circulation petition among the property owners within the proposed boundary requesting historic resource survey.
Right? Do we have a second for it?
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Commissioner Shah,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
and Chairman Amarian.
I don't want to fall behind. I also enthusiastically yes.
I'd broken this up on the agenda into 2 items, with the distribution of the petition being the second. I think it's okay to merge them as one item. That's only done that way in case you said no to the first item, then we wouldn't go forward with the petition.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
A lot of work ahead of you.
Yeah.
Applause is for you, actually.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Shall we move on? 7C, please.
7C, we briefly saw before for the Historic District nomination. This is 1770 Grandview Avenue.
Mr. Chair, if I may, before
please.
staff, this time, if I may, I want to recuse myself from this case. I just want to say a few things before you recuse me, Mr. Chair.
Please do.
I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Ovanesian a few years ago, and my office handled the variance case and an addition behind the garage and the engineering work that took place. Although it has been more than 12 months that has passed since my involvement to it, but the main reason that I want to recuse myself is the fact that I approached Mr. Ovanessian several times to bring this application forward, and I don't want to show any favoritism for this application. I think it's worthy, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Wise decision. All right, shall we move on, please?
Yes. Move on. 1770 Grandview is a Spanish colonial revival-style residence. And you can see, I think, pretty much from the start that it's a unique property in many ways. Some of those ways are because of the way it was designed originally. Some of those things come from subsequent changes to the house. But what we're looking at is a property that staff believes meets 3 of the criteria for designation. Just to run through where we're located, the house is literally right next door to the entrance to the Brand Library. The original this actually isn't the original El Miradero gate. This is a later gate that was built, and I'm not sure what year it was built. Someone here might be able to help me with that, but it was built before 1770 Grandview, so probably from the early 20s. But it is, for a residential neighborhood where we often wouldn't be able to say that a certain intersection or a certain site is kind of one of the more distinguishing visual features of a neighborhood, because this is right next to the gates and it's such a highly trafficked area and such an important part of Glendale history. The fact that this property was built immediately adjacent to the Brand property and to the gateway makes us think that it definitely would qualify under criterion F for, criterion E as a kind of recognized visual feature of the neighborhood. Here's a historic aerial view where you can see the Brand Library. The Brand House, El Miradero, before it became the library, obviously. You can see the Brand Aerodrome, the airfield, in the lower left. You can see the orange groves that were such an important feature of the property over the years. And then on the right side, you can see the 1770 Grandview property before the streets were all cut. Mountain didn't go through at that point. This house was built by Robert Jensen, who was the son of Henry Jensen. Henry Jensen developed a series of entertainment palaces, recreation centers, and movie theaters that really played an important role in the history not just of Glendale, but of the entire region where he was building these things. The Palace Grand Theater was one of the earliest movie theaters in Glendale, and it was built in 1914. It's up at the top left. Robert Jensen, the son, became very important within the business. There were 2 Jensen sons, and Robert seems to have done most of the work related to the Glendale properties, managing them, managing the real estate interests after the properties kind of moved on and weren't being their original way. So for that reason, we think that Robert Jensen is an important figure in Glendale, and then the Jensen Family Association, I think, is important just as Glendale becoming a regional entertainment center. I think it's very interesting that, we still have that aspect in town. What happened at the Palace Grand, it was built in 1914, but then in 1920 the Glendale Theater opened, which was much more modern, much more exciting. Everyone wanted to go there. No one went to the Palace Grand anymore. So instead of just shutting it down, they decided to remodel it, rebuild it, and convert it into something completely different, which was the Palace Grand Shops, which was also known as the Arcade Building. And that's on the lower right. And what's interesting about these recreation centers that the Jensen family did was that they were sort of like, people compare it to City Walk today, where it was a lot of different types of businesses coming together under one roof. So you would have a drugstore and a jewelry store. Upstairs you had the Egyptian Village Cafe restaurant, which everyone loved back in the day, and kind of a preservation battle a number of years ago. And then down in the basement you actually had the recreation center, where you had a bowling alley and a billiard hall and a barber shop. So it was kind of a lot of uses, kind of a modern conception of how to design and put a building together. And then we have these interior shots that just show how elaborate and how amazing this site must have been before it was torn down not too long ago. And the Egyptian Village was upstairs, and then the shops, this is the main arcade floor, and you can see the entire arcade was just lit by skylights at the top. It looks like it must have been really amazing. So So for the connection with the Jensen family and Robert Jensen specifically, staff thinks that this meets criterion C for significance with the people important in the history and development of the city. And then for the architecture itself, we're really looking at, a house with a lot of unique features, but a house with some challenges also in terms of designating under this criterion because of additions and alterations that were made over the years. So in the report, I went into some detail, but was hoping to hear more from the Commission in terms of your thoughts about the appropriateness of some of this work. So I'll just kind of take you through the different facades. The house was built in 1925. It's definitely not the typical Spanish colonial revival that we see in Glendale. Even when you strip away some of the white, most of the ornament, especially the columns and the lower or the top picture there, are not original. But the minaret turret that runs up the side of the three-story tower is really a completely striking feature with its kind of funny rounded cone for a roof. And the presence of this next to the El Miradero house and gates just brought this kind of sense of architectural exoticism to the neighborhood you don't see on most houses through Glendale. On the upper picture, we're looking at the original house, and there's a porte cochere that was part of the original house that you see in the lower picture, and then everything to the right of the porte cochere and everything on the second floor of the porte cochere was added in 1995 by a previous owner. So this house does have a significant addition, which has caused problems when we've been analyzing properties under the criteria before. In this case, we think that the addition is, to some degree, for a very prominent addition, it's deferential to the main body of the house and only connects to the house at a few points at the side of the porte cochere, and then somewhat set back at that second floor hallway that connects the main old house to the what's now the master bedroom up on the second floor of the addition. Here are a couple of details at the front of the house. The door and the door surround appear to be original. We don't think that the canopy above the door is original, but it's a real fine piece of work with bronze and glass, and seems to fit with the style of the house relatively well. Here's a shot of the porch on the first floor. There's kind of an arcaded porch. And then the room above has that interesting window with the shallow arch above it. The ornament above that window that you see, I guess, on both photos, that kind of triangular ornament, is embedded in the stucco in a way that a lot of the other ornament is clearly applied to the face of the building. It's not the most typical feature that we would see on a Spanish colonial revival, but we can't say whether it's original, an early addition. It's definitely not something that was added in recent years. Here's a site plan, floor plan of the house, just so that you can see the separation. What this doesn't show, that just shows dash lines for the porte cochere, where the driveway separates the main house from the addition to the south. Here's a view of the addition. In general, the proportions and quality of construction of the addition seem good and in keeping with the house, but it does take some of the extravagant features that were added in 1995 and there are even more of them on the addition. So that's something that staff is recommending the Commission consider as part of its Mills Act discussion. Here's the rear of the house, and you can see a lot of the architectural detailing continues around to the back. You have the arched windows at the third floor, which is kind of a ballroom type of space upstairs. You have these outriggers under the window at the right, at the second floor, which correspond to the kind of beam in front of the house. And then you have a garage that's a pretty pristine example of an early garage in Glendale. This is the facade that really caught my interest because I didn't remember it looking quite like this, but when I see these kind of stepped parapets and the kind of massing, it just brought to mind kind of the Pueblo kind of style. Mm-hmm. And it's not something visible from the front of the house, so it's kind of a nice treat to come around the back and get kind of a different architectural experience. All of the flat-roofed areas serve as terraces. Obviously, the red tile roof portions face toward the front. Here are some examples of the detail of the minaret at the top and its roof. The chimney has some stucco detailing that recalls those kind of little arches that you have at the minaret. The stucco detailing at the lower left picture, which is back to show you, that's at this area kind of around the tower, at the front of the tower on either side of the minaret. Struck me as unusual when I first looked at it. I tried to find it in early photos just to verify if it was an original feature or a later feature, and I couldn't find it. I'll show you one of those photos in a moment. Looking at it, though, it definitely looks like it's older ornament and very likely could be original. And what I'm always struck by with Spanish colonial especially is just the variety of architects' imaginations as they worked with the style. So it's quite possible that that's original. And then the bottom picture is another piece of the stucco detail that I think is early, if not original. The upper portion in the center is something that is more applied to the house, but it's hard to tell. It's in a photograph that predates all of the kind of ornamentation that was put on in 1995. And I have that photo coming up in a moment, so I'll come back to that. Staff is recommending that if the commission is going to put this on the register, and particularly if it's interested in entering into a Mills Act contract with the applicant, that we carefully consider some of the ornament on the house that was added in 1995. In my opinion, a lot of it detracts from the original historic character of the house, whereas the presence of the addition, I think we can make strong arguments for. It's a suitable addition, but a lot of these kind of tchotchkes and pieces that were put on later definitely take something away from the experience of the house. The two things that jumped out at me most, and so these are the two things I would make a stronger recommendation about, are the freestanding columns, flank the picture window, and there are also columns on the addition. And then this arch over the fence. The fence was installed by Terry Kath, who was an early owner, who was the guitarist and singer for the band Chicago. So he got permits for this. It went through the variance process because of his celebrity. There was concern, so they were able to put up the fence. The same fence appears to have then later been altered with a lot of these kind of additions. So the arch over the driveway and the columns were a particular kind of question mark for staff looking at this. And then I was hoping to hear from the commission in terms of what your thoughts are about this ornament and then the rest, and whether you think it would be appropriate or should be changed as part of the Mills Act. Here's that photograph. It's an old aerial photograph that I think is from the 20s, later 20s. And I zoomed in as well as I could, and it's a super high-resolution picture from the library, but still could not figure out if that, I was looking especially for that stucco band on the tower, could not see if it was there or not. We do have this picture that was from a real estate brochure or an article, I'm not sure. This is from 1983, so it predates the Armand Arc additions, the addition as well as all the ornamentation. What I think is interesting in this picture is you can see that the stucco was called out in different colors, the kind of scroll work at the tower. So the color palette of the house was different, but you do see around toward the right on the south facade of the third floor, up here, you can see those pieces that were added that do not look original, but I can't say for sure one way or another. They're kind of unusual. And then you can also see these tiles that originally I was completely sure that those were part of the Armand Arc addition or an ornamentation period, but they're here in the 1983 picture. My best guess is that they wouldn't have been there when the house was built. Here, obviously, they're called out in a dark color, and I think today they're white, matching the other one. So, as I mentioned earlier, going through this, we think the Robert Jensen connection is very strong for the property, and his connection with the history of the city is fairly well proven. It is one of the best remaining architectural types in the neighborhood because of its kind of exotic and unique character, and this is taking into account that there have been changes made. And we also feel that it has outstanding architectural design details, material craftsmanship, again, kind of excluding some later ornamental work. And then finally, criterion E, which I mentioned before about the unique location and the singular sticks. It's definitely an established feature of the neighborhood. All for the presentation.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to ask the applicant to comment. Right, that's the sequence.
Unless you have questions, yeah.
Are there any questions from Jay?
Not at this moment.
How about you, Arlen? Okay, Mr. Ovanesian, forward and
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Rubik Ovanesian. My wife, Carmen, and I, we own the property. We purchased it in 2002. At that time, basically, we realized the house was in a very, very poor condition, falling apart. We've spent in excess of $1 million restoring it, and I discussed some of those renovations with some of you as you visited our house yesterday, the property. We're here today basically because Commissioner Mardian he offered to handle a variance for us for free. Basically, we paid him for the engineering work that his engineer did and the variance cost. So he's the reason that I'm here today, because he's been relentless in insisting that we nominate the house. I apologize for my handwriting on the application. I thought it was the original draft. Later on, I'll get a Word document so then I can type it in. But given the time urgency, putting the rest of the package together, my father says, your handwriting's so poor, you should have been a doctor. But that's another story. My brother is a general contractor. He works in the larger Los Angeles area with very famous designers, architects, and he's worked on numerous historical restoration projects. So Raz, my brother, and I, we studied the property as I decided to purchase it, and we examined a lot of the features, the historical elements and stuff, and so we've done our best to restore it, and some might agree with some of the colors, but we try to make it the best we can based on our combined 50 years plus experience that we have in real estate renovations, restorations, ownership, and construction. So what we've done is, as Mr. Platt said, is basically we've removed quite a bit of elements from the house, stuff that were openly, that shouldn't have been there in the backyard. I had some pictures, but you didn't have the time to go through them. A lot of elements in the backyard and inside the house, and we've done our best to restore the interior, but I understand that's not a concern of the Commission. I'm glad that Mr. Platt has decided to support this, all three categories. Thank you, Mr. Platt. And one request that I had was if the Commission would consider the criteria E, exemplary, physical property at a particular location that is next to the gates of the main entrance to Brand Park, and we refer to the property as Casa de Ovanesian because we spent quite a bit of time and we're still working through restoring it, and it's a job which sometimes we get tired of it and just say, okay, we're going to take a year off and then get back at it inside and outside, including the landscaping and many elements, as Mr. Platt pointed out. So that's what I have. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from Mr. Owen? Please.
Thank you very much for bringing this forward. It's a structure that I've seen in Glendale for many years, and beautiful and very noteworthy, I think, to the city from its location and design and style. It's interesting. I decided not to read staff's recommendation prior to visiting the house to really make my own kind of...
What I do with movies.
Yeah, so listen to the critiques first. And it's definitely, in many categories, noteworthy and should be considered for the Historic Register. The only two things, oddly enough, that I agree exactly with Jay was the arch at the front entrance over the driveway. It just takes away so much from, I think, from the house, especially being next to the entrance to Brand Park with its own kind of facade and structural element. It's just competing to me. And if you look
That was my recommendation.
Yeah, that was your recommendation. Yeah, so I agree. I'm saying I agree with you without...
disagreed. So.
What I found interesting is the two things you recommend taking off is exactly the things I agree with. The columns also on the front facade, which had been added, I think should also go if we're considering that. I think, again, that takes away from truly the design of the original structure. Can you go to those slides, Jay? The ones to the left and right of the front arched window?
There we go.
Right there. And also on the addition.
I can scroll back and forth.
Yeah, that's okay.
There.
The original, or I should say not the original, but the ironwork fence that was more, as it was, I think, in the 1983 photo, definitely to me sets off the house more because it detracts less from the architecture. But I think the two elements to me which are most concerning would be the main arched feature over the driveway and those two colonnades. That's what really, I think if those were removed, especially if the Mills Act was granted, I think in my opinion, those would be on Mills Act. The other thing I think just for consistency's sake, as far as the naming of the house, I know it was referred to as the Jensen House, and the applicant is requesting that Casa de Ovanesian be considered. I would prefer to stick with the more historic naming, meaning honor that of the original owner, designer, architect, that type of thing, meaning the Jensen. But overall, I think you've done an amazing job with the restoration. Obviously, you and your wife have poured your heart and soul into the place and have brought it up to amazing level of quality and really kind of saved it from further deterioration. So I really appreciate that and, really honor and respect you for that. And yeah, it's one of the most prominent buildings and structures in Glendale. I think it should definitely be added to the register.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ovanesian, for coming forward with your house. I sincerely hope that you're happy to be nominating your house, since it's your house, and you are doing it. That you're glad to be nominating your house, and you're not just doing it because you were coerced into it. It's such a wonderful house, and you've done a nice job with it, a beautiful job in bringing it back to some of its former glory. I happened to see the house before it transitioned from Mr. Ark to Mr. Ovanesian, and there was quite a bit of additional pastiche on it, even more than there is now, actually, especially on the interior. But I have to say that having found the house in the book Red Tile Style, which I forgot that I owned, which is a wonderful book about just the joys of Spanish colonial revival architecture, and I'm sure a number of you have that book. And the house is of course, highlighted in the book, and it's the first sentence that is that one reads is Spanish revival meets movie set in this sprawling Glendale, California home, and I think there is a lot of whimsy and fantasy incorporated into the house that actually kind of defines it in a way. So I would say that I totally agree that the arch is a distraction, and so I would agree that that should be removed and be part of the Mills Act. I think the fence can certainly remain. I think the columns could remain. It's funny that in the pictures you see of the house, when it's painted all one monotone, it's in monotone, some of these additional enhancements don't stand out as much as they do now. And I think the differential in the paint color probably draws our attention to them, but I think that the removal of the balustrade, which I think is no longer in front of those windows. Oh, it is in that window, but not in the other one.
Not in the front window.
Not in the front one. Okay, so the balustrade has been removed there, and I think that kind of tones down the impact of the columns and actually kind of contributes to the whimsy. So, I could go either way on that, but I feel pretty strongly about the arch as well.
This balustrade on the addition?
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings about anything really other than the arch. I think it's an all-or-nothing thing. There's so much pastiche on the house, as is mentioned in the caption for the picture in the book, that, you know, that's almost part of the definition of what the house is. So I wouldn't go any farther than that very distracting arch. I agree with the name. I think I would prefer the name Jensen House as opposed to the address, because I think it's sad enough that we've lost Henry Jensen's main contribution to Glendale, and that we need to honor the Jensens for the contributions they've made. And that if that doesn't go through, that the address would probably be the appropriate name, which would be consistent with the way we handle historic naming.
General, our policy when we have a finding of significance under criterion C, generally the house would be named for that person. Jensen House.
Yeah. The addition, you know, it's rather monolithic, but I think it's fine and goes nicely with the house for what it is, and there's really nothing we can do about that other than happily accept it. So other than the arch, I'm fine with the application as it is, and thank you very much for coming forward with it. It's certainly a significant house in Glendale and a very visible one.
Thank you, Arlene.
I have to agree with Commissioner Vidor on almost everything. I'm not bothered by the columns themselves. There is a whimsy to it, and the house has that kind of whimsy. It's kind of winking at you in a way, and it's a house that, since I grew up in Glendale, I went past all the time. I'm not so much bothered by the arch, per se, depending on when it was put up. Was it put up by in 1995?
It wasn't
So
there.
it dates from 95. It doesn't date from the Chicago era.
Yeah, it wasn't from Terry Kath.
Okay, on that. I really, either way on it, I wasn't bothered by it. The house has so many different articulations. It's just one more than that. But I definitely would like to keep the gate itself. And it definitely should be nominated, and it definitely should be accepted. It is one of those singular houses in Glendale that everybody knows. If you say, well, it's the house right next to Brand Library, there's no imagination as to which house it is. They know it. I mean, for the many years that it was pink, it was, you know, that pink house right next to the Brand Library. It definitely represents the Jensens, and I think, like Commissioner Vidor said, this is one of the few things that the city of Glendale can make amends to for what they did with the Egyptian Village Cafe many, many, many years ago. So I'd be more than happy having it the way it is, or if the commissioners decide that they want to take the arch down, I wouldn't object to it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I like to also thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's a very important and significant house located in a very, very important site in Glendale. I have several issues with the house. Not with the house, but with the embellishments. With all elements, all white elements, to me, are unnecessary elements. The round column caps, the urns, the tall columns hugging the windows, both on south and west facade, front facade, as well as this one that we see. I also have problems with the balustrades and also with the entry. These white embellishments also are, in my opinion, are in conflict with the El Miradero entrance, the archway to the Brand Park. At a certain point, you don't know whether this is the continuation of the arch or what it is. For me, I like to nominate this, but I like to see all the white elements to be removed. All columns, column caps, and also the archway.
That extend to the stucco detailing at the top of the tower that we're not sure?
No, I wouldn't want to suggest that. No, we are not sure about it. And also, visually, it is not at the level of the entrance to Brand Park, where I find it some conflict, visual conflict. So I would not make any comment on that. I'm more concerned about what we see on the eye level and surrounding the arch window as well as the window on the south. So my problem is all those. I also think that the in arch entrance is not a very good design, actually. If it was a good design, I would not have this much. Look at the mass of the house, and suddenly you have this arch that it looks like it is made of matches or something. These are, look at the numerous white elements that are right in front of your eyes when you are looking at the building. The building should be the main focus. Those are my comments, and I also like to support the idea of not changing the name and keeping the name as Jensen House. It is much more appropriate, and we will be giving our dues to a significant person who has worked in our city. The little white urns behind the fence, those are removable elements. I wouldn't mind them. But the front ones, sitting on tall columns, those are the ones that I object. So that's where I come from. That is the end of my comments. Anybody else would like to say more things?
Well, just to talk amongst, ourselves, I think it's really a balance, meaning this is an opportunity to put a very significant structure on the register. And in one sense, we don't want to jeopardize that. In the other sense, if we wouldn't have approved some of these embellishments or additions or, changes to it, I think it's kind of finding the balance, the happy medium between what we could tie to the Mills Act, meaning they would be getting a significant tax savings, therefore maybe some of these removed, and what is our priority level for those items, so we can because I really appreciate the owner bringing it forward. It is an important structure. Without the owner's support of it and bringing it forward, we would never have this opportunity. So I think we have to carefully weigh value of
I agree with Commissioner Shire. I think that's a very reasonable, level-headed approach to take with a Mills Act work plan. But I'd also just like to reiterate, if I could, because I do agree with the authors of this book who have studied the entire gamut in the United States of Spanish colonial architecture. What they're calling this house out for is that it merely, and I'll quote from them, like one of its film set contemporaries, this remarkable house merely eschews authenticity for effect, whether it's Egyptian, Arabic, Italian Renaissance, or just plain old Spanish revival. No exotic element is left unexploited. And then it talks about the most striking feature being the minaret, and that in terms of residential architecture, you can count on the fingers of one hand how many residences have a minaret. So, they're really pointing that out as extremely unusual. But, I think that just to go back to what Desiree said, we should be very careful about not overdoing it. But on the other hand, I really do not believe this house is entirely a Spanish colonial house, and we shouldn't really hold it to the standard of pure Spanish colonial. It's an eclectic fantasy house, and certainly the previous owner built on that to an extreme degree, but we also should maybe carefully prioritize a few things that we think are the most important, because your point is well taken, Commissioner Amirian, Chairman Amirian, and I think that maybe the highlighting in this very bold white also exacerbates the issue of the pastiche, too. So we're seeing more of it than we did when the house basically was monotonal and it was all one color. Much more noticeable now.
If Chair Amirian would like, I'll volunteer to keep score, and we can talk about individual elements and see which of those the Commission has agreed on, where there's disagreement, and then hopefully you'll be able to make a decision today once we find out. I would think, based on your comments, it seems there was almost unanimous, not quite, but the arch seemed to be an issue that most people thought not as appropriate as some of the other features.
Yes, but also looking at the fence has elements of the arch in it, so, that would be, I guess, having to redesign the fence. Can that be removed without...
What I picture, the two piers on either side of the arch could remain, and the arch would then be removed.
And the arch goes. Okay, fine.
Then we have the kind of finials on top of the piers at the arch and then all along the fence.
I have major problems with that. I think really those are distracting from the house. The house is very majestic. Unnecessary. It's just like a nice looking guy has bad clothes. It's just I will go. This house has to be nominated. I am not going to vote against it, but I would like to see that in a more majestic way. These elements are really, really, in my opinion, distracting.
Well, hopefully today, since we're toward the end of the year, so we need to wrap up our Mills Act process for the year. So what I'm hoping to get from the Commission is kind of a consensus vote where at the end we're going to be able to say this needs to be removed, we're okay with this feature. So if any of the other commissioners have thoughts on the finials, specifically on the fence posts and then next to the arch.
Ask a question?
Please do.
Would the finials bother you as much? It's hard to project, but you have an architect's eye, so you could do it. If they were the same color as the posts there?
If we are talking about architecture, it would be meaningless. It would be less distractive, of course, but it would be meaningless. I would also, if we are not going to impose that they are removed, then my second choice would be to paint it possibly the same color as the...
That's something other commissioners, if we have two commissioners who would approve them if they were painted?
I would.
I would.
Is it worthy, or can we open up questions of the owner, what they would be willing to do, or?
Well, why don't we run down your list
First.
and make sure. The Commission does have ultimate authority on the Mills Act. If you made recommendations that the owner didn't accept for the Mills Act, it would be his choice to not enter into the contract. But I think it's fair to ask once we have...
I just ask a question from my colleagues. Do you think those elements on the top of the columns are appropriate? Now, if they are, that's a different story. It's a judgment call. Or you are thinking it's too expensive to remove. That's why you are not asking the applicant to do that. There are two different questions.
If we're talking just about architecture and design and styling, and for instance, if it was on the register and the owner came in wanting to do that, no, I would not approve it. I think they're not the right scale, they're not the right shape. It's definitely distracting from the original design of the structure and of the elements on the original building. So no, I agree with you there. I completely see that. My predicament is it should be on the register. It's important and significant enough, and I don't want to put stipulations on it to the level that the owner is not willing to continue. I think that's where I'm kind of caught.
And just a reminder for the Commission, a property only needs to meet one criterion for designation. I think there was pretty much unanimous view that just for the Jensen connection alone, that this house might be designatable regardless of its architecture. So that does give you within the parameters of the ordinance and the intention of what we're doing with designations to kind of have a little bit of leeway architecturally.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, for me, the house is extremely large and extremely grand, and the removal of the finials doesn't go a very long way to eclipse the grandiosity of the house. And that if we wanted to pursue that removal thing in this particular element of the house, that those plaster posts are just as distracting. And I think, even though color isn't our issue, but I have to make an editorial comment because it's the topic we're discussing right now. I think the white paint all over the place really highlights the amount of pastiche there is in the house. It leads your eye to it. It's very striking. And so for me, the finial is only a minor element of what is distracting there. The posts themselves, those thin vertical plaster posts with the adobe color, will be distracting even after the finials are gone, for me anyway. So I would say that I don't know if the removal of the finials goes that long a way in obliterating the distraction that is present. So that's just the way I feel about it. It's either take the post down and put a new fence up, you want to get rid of distraction, or forget about the finials and just paint them. The house is so big and grandiose. Those small finial elements don't eclipse anything for me. I'm looking at the house.
Are we coming to consensus on that?
Well, I think the finials and the post mimic the minaret, to tell you the truth, from my eye. So I am not a trained architect, but I don't see it as detracting. I see it as just smaller minarets in a way. So.
Okay, it looks like I am in the minority on this one. So
Have one more person.
So I'm not insisting. I was just expressing my opinion. Let's go forward. Yeah.
But do we have consensus on painting those out? Even though the commission doesn't regulate color, you can regulate the impact of a paint scheme situation like this if you wanted to go there.
I would like to see some of these elements de-emphasized, but I won't say the P word.
I concur.
What? Look, hey, no English. What is the P word?
Paint.
Oh, paint. Well,
okay. I don't want this to go on forever, but I think we do need to hit pretty much all of the elements. The freestanding columns on the front of the house, and then also around on the addition side.
I really would want those to go. The tall columns you are talking about.
Yeah, the columns.
They're emphasizing the height of the building. It's already a tall building. To me, they have to go.
I agree. It's the shape and scale is very detracting from the minaret, in my opinion. And that front facade with the arch and the detailing you have below the window, and then the tall minaret, I think it would just help enhance the minaret and the original design of the structure. And right now, those are, in my opinion, in complete conflict from shape and scale and fluting, I think, even on them, if I looked closely enough.
Yeah, they're fluted.
So I would have to concur.
Would that apply to those on the addition as well?
Yes. But in my opinion, those would really be like contingent on the Mills Act contract.
Yeah, my assumption has been that
These
this would all be
items.
conditions placed
Yeah.
into the Mills Act contract with a time frame like we've done for other contracts. So.
How about those balustrades? Any objection to those? They are not really period elements for this.
Well, if we're removing things, since they were removed from the other window, I would say to achieve consistency, I'd like to see those removed because those are more blocking the house's primary facade. So that is of more interest to me than the columns. To me, the columns are kind of like the minaret. They're whimsical, playful, and totally eclectic, and somewhat outrageous. But that's what this house is. It's an eclectic fantasy house. So I would say for consistency, if we want to minimize or de-emphasize the pastiche and the decorative elements, that balustrade should come off to replicate what's on the other window and leave the columns on.
And then since this is kind of a patio, there would need to be some sort of railing there to replace that. Would it be good to?
The railing should mimic the railing on the property line.
Okay, so an iron railing.
A shorter version of it, painted the same color, so it will recede.
The other, I heard that the urns behind the fence, didn't have much talk about those, but I heard that no one thought, or I didn't hear that people thought they were a huge problem.
I guess in my opinion, it's where do you stop, right? Ideally, it would be in its pristine condition as it was originally designed. And now there's been so much, embellishment and modification, and the house has truly become something quite different. I mean, it was very grand and simple in the first photos I look at, or in the earliest photos we see. Now it's become kind of what you've said and what you've read, very whimsical and eclectic, and the more that's added to it has made it something quite different from the original intent. But structures go through many morphings over the years. Some you like better than others. So I guess for me, it's hard to say, because if I really would be considering this from its original grandeur and beauty, none of that would be there. It would be similar to the 1983 photo, at least, with a very simple wrought iron fence that really disappears and the grandeur of the house is exposed. With all the embellishments added, it's busy and, in my opinion, takes away from the house, but it is what we're evaluating today. It's a structure that's gone through quite a history. I'm not sure where you stop in kind of contenting embellishments. So I think that's where I'm caught. Like you say, the urns can be removed. They're, even plantings could grow tall enough to cover them over time, so I guess I worry less about those than truly kind of some of the structural elements or things really more detracting from the house itself. I'm trying to ignore kind of that front fencing, pillars. I think, like the two I mentioned before, I think compete with the minaret, which is the tall columns on the structure itself, and the arch, which seems to be, like Chairman said, very flimsy, not the right shape and style for this grand of a property. I will let the other things go, although not my first preference.
Or we can backtrack and say, Arlene said it's very whimsical. Let it be as is.
If we want to backtrack and say that it's whimsical and it is what it is, the only thing I would stand firm on is the arch. I really think that
I would agree with
completely
that.
distracts. And looking at the two facades of the Brand Library or Brand Park right next to it, can you go to that shot really quick? You had a side view. Those two definitely compete. And no, you had one kind of the front lawn looking towards the entrance to Brand Park.
Back one more.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
So the kind of round curved arch of the driveway of the home really, I think, detracts from that beautiful brand.
How would you feel about that, Arlene?
The arch? Go for that.
Go for that. Simplifies everything.
Okay, so we remove the arch, everything else remains.
Everything is whimsical. Let it stay.
Monochrome or painted, or no opinion?
If it is whimsical, let it stay as is.
There is a whimsy to it.
Huh?
There is a whimsy to it. When you put a minaret on your house, you have to have some whimsy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way it is, When you think of the year that it was built, would be different than anything else around. Besides the fact that it is different than anything else around, it's the Jensens. You look at their arcades, you see the stuff that they did. I mean, this was part of who they were.
Yeah, they didn't put the columns in, right?
No.
No, but
No, Armand,
But
right?
the minaret dates to the
Armand
Jensens.
did, yeah. But he's, Commissioner Morgan has a point that it does kind of reflect the grand eclecticism that the Jensens seem to pursue in their commercial property.
I don't think they would have ruled against it, to tell you the truth, knowing the Jensens.
Okay, so
Okay,
the discussion ends here. All the commission is suggesting, if I am concluding it right, removal of the arch entry.
Don't add any more, please.
Okay, so
Okay, well, shall we hear from the applicant before we move, or
if you want to reopen the hearing, sure.
Yeah, it would be mute. Mr. Ovanesian, you want to say something?
Again, Rubik Ovanesian, owner of the house at 1770 Grandview. Commissioner Vidor, that's a good book. I actually have a copy. I had put it out, but I forgot to mention it yesterday. As far as the Jensen Arcade, I wanted to touch on that. It was the City of Glendale's redevelopment agency that bought it and demolished it. So I just want to be on the record that they've done a lot of stupid things in the history of the city, for the path of
Believe
development.
that statement, stupid.
I'm sorry?
We'll believe that.
Okay, well, just a second. And let me get my glasses so I can read my notes. As far as some of the painting issues, we will consider those next time we're painting the house, as far as the colors, monotone and stuff. But we don't like them as condition. We don't want them as condition. Let me just say it very simply. It's Monday. I'm in a good mood. Give me one condition for the Mills Act. Is it the arch or the columns? I'll go along. Otherwise, I'm not prepared to move forward, and I would like to withdraw my nomination. So give me one condition. I'll work with it. The arch or the column. You have
that already. You have that condition.
Okay.
Oh, no, we have already zeroed it down to one. We don't need any alternative.
I understand. No, it's not an alternative. I'm just saying give me one condition. I got to sell it to my wife. So if it's the issue is not that we're going to spend an enormous amount of time and money on this. So you guys want the columns down? I'll go along, the 8 columns. If you don't, then it's the arch. I'll remove the arch exactly from the point that is connecting the posts. Everything else stays. So the actual disconnect, the arch, everything else stays. So is it the arch or is the columns? I'm sorry?
If you talk too much about that and give us conditions, we might change our minds.
No, just those were the 2 main conditions Mr. Platt had put forward.
Commissioners had already made a decision that meets what you're asking for, so.
I don't know. I wasn't paying attention, to be honest with you. I was checking some other notes.
Actually, it will be 2 conditions. Everybody agreed here that the name should not change and it should be Jensen. So,
but as far as the name,
you also try to sell that to your wife as well.
Well, under the criteria E, where it is, and the being next to the entrance, you do not have to comply with any architectural issues or any of the owner's issues. So it's strictly on its own merits. It qualifies as Mr. Platt has put it. So under those conditions, you can still ask for that. So please let me know which condition you want, and
okay.
I'll try to pay attention and decide to agree with it or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Anybody would like to make a motion? 8.
I have a question for Jay. Did we receive the piece of paper that we're supposed to?
Sadly, no.
Oh, okay. Got it.
That was only 1 month worth of thing.
It's going to become a regular feature, but it's not in my head yet, so.
Okay.
Well, I would like to make a motion.
I guess you can do it. Five of 5.
I'd like to make a motion to go forward with the staff recommendation that we recommend to City Council that the property at 770 Grandview Avenue be designated a historic resource in the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, and that we make a recommendation to City Council to authorize to enter into a Mills Act contract with one stipulation, that the arch be removed from the entrance and that the name of the house remain the Jensen House.
I second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
and Chairman Amir.
Yes. Congratulations, Mr. Ovanesian.
Thank you very much.
Please try to contain your excitement, sir.
Any negotiate, council meeting, planning commission.
This is nothing, huh?
Monday morning, like Monday afternoon exercise. Thank you.
Okay, come on in, Mr. Mardian. All right.
And Chair, I need to recuse myself for the next one. I'm within 500 feet of the property.
Why don't we all recuse ourselves? And make it easy. Okay, thank you. The only thing is going to be right, where we stand. Item number D, 7D.
Refusal begins. Okay, item 7D is a single-family house at 1251 Rosmoyne Avenue. And this is a beautiful Spanish colonial revival. So we have looking at another Spanish house. This one was built in 1928, and it's in the Rosmoyne neighborhood. So this is within the boundary of the area that's being considered as a Rosmoyne Historic District, and it dates to the period of significance that's been proposed for the neighborhood. It looks like it would be a likely contributor if this district were to come to pass and be designated. 1251 Rosmoyne has a lot of interesting features. We don't know the architect of the house, but it was built by Seth Rice, whose name comes up relatively often in the building permit records. So he seems to have been a Glendale builder of some reputation. He did a number of houses in this neighborhood and probably more throughout the area. The applicant did nominate the house as significant because of the connection with Seth Rice, but at this point we don't know enough about him, about his body of work, and certainly how we would separate like one house from another to really understand how it would place. Obviously, all of the builder's properties couldn't be designated. They would really be eligible just for that connection. But what we see here is kind of some very interesting use of the Spanish colonial style and actually some unusual features. It has a very prominent balcony with some beautiful turned wood columns and balusters kind of inset into the building above the front entrance, and then that front entry door is a really nice example set so deeply within a stucco reveal that kind of echoes the arch of the picture window on the left. This property is interesting because of the shape of the lot. It's a very shallow lot, kind of an irregular wedge-shaped lot because of the street pattern around it. So what we normally think of as the typical rear garage detached from the house, kind of at the back of the lot, in this case is pushed forward toward the street, which gives it a more modern character, but this is definitely the original location and condition of the garage, except for the garage door, which has been replaced. Here's a close-up of a few of the details at the front. You get a better view of the elaborate column capitals and beam ends that support the roof over the balcony. The heavy lintel over a couple of the windows. You see an example at the right. And then the feature that struck me most about the house is this kind of unusual window, or just recessed windows at the second floor. There are 4 of these windows that have these really shallow splayed jambs and kind of a notched out opening at the sill. And I've never really seen anything like it. It does seem like an interesting architectural feature. Here are a couple of the arches, including the arch going, there's a kind of a gate that connects the detached garage and secures the backyard from the street. Here's some shots of the rear facade. There have been a number of alterations at the rear. The most significant ones are in the top right picture, where we have kind of this awkwardly proportioned kind of rear appendage coming off the main body of the house. There was construction projecting toward the rear originally, and a recent campaign of construction kind of filled in some open balconies or open terraces on either side of this space upstairs. Looking at the house myself and reviewing the photos, I saw that this chimney doesn't appear to be an original chimney, but we don't have any permit history for that. We do have permits for the other work on the house. So these alterations are all just visible from the backyard, except for the chimney, which you can see from the street. And here's a detail of what, for me, is one of the biggest obstacles for the house in terms of its eligibility. This very rough, kind of smushed-on stucco texture that definitely is not the original stucco condition that we expect from these Spanish colonial houses with the smooth plaster. As I was reviewing this and trying to apply the criteria, I went through the criteria that the applicant had listed in the application, and several of those we see kind of routinely coming before us that we just can't quite make the finding. In this case, we can't say that this specific individual house reflects the heritage of the city, and I think we've talked about the sorts of properties that would meet that criterion. And again, Seth Rice, we just don't know enough and couldn't place this house even within the context of what we know of his work to make any kind of assessment for his significance. And then, of course, we come to criterion D, which is where most properties do or do not qualify for the register. And in the case of this house, it was very difficult to make a finding on either count. Certainly in Ross Moyne, we've seen that it's hard to say that a single Spanish colonial house is different enough, stands out from its neighbors enough to make the first part of the finding that it's one of the best remaining architectural types in the area. And in the case of this house, despite what I think are some interesting features, particularly those windows at the second floor are definitely unusual, it's playing with kind of a set of parts that we've seen on a lot of Spanish colonial houses: an arched picture window, a lovely front door, and some exposed wood lintels. These are all features we see on many Spanish colonial houses, which certainly adds to the beauty of the house and makes it a very nice house within the neighborhood. But I couldn't really use that ability to discern that there's something different happening at this house than is happening at many of the other houses, even immediately around it. There are some really fine examples. So staff couldn't make a finding about it meeting criterion D. And then finally, criterion E, the unique location, doesn't really, I think we just saw a house that I think was very clearly meets this criterion, and this house I don't believe does when you're on the street looking at it. And then criterion G also is something we're usually looking for in a truly natural setting, not kind of a landscaped suburban setting, for something to meet criterion G. The owner and applicant is here to answer questions, or if you have questions for me.
Any questions from Jay?
I do have one. Seth Rice, if we did have a listing of all of his houses, and this turned out to be the best Seth Rice house in all of Glendale, would that affect it at all?
If we knew more about his career, the fact that, every house was built by a builder.
Right, correct.
At some point. We'd really have to know, was he the biggest builder in the city history, and was this his masterpiece? We also don't know if he was the designer of the houses. The report from Tim Gregory for the house, when we see people like Seth Rice, there's speculation that the builder served as the architect.
The architect itself.
Sometimes they worked out of kind of plan books, but a lot of the houses seem to be kind of more original than plan book houses, and this one seems to be those. So, I think we can say that whoever designed and built it was talented and was working well with the kind of pieces of Spanish colonial revival they could play with. But even if for Seth Rice, it would be hard without a...
Right, even if this was his best house, it would still be hard.
Not necessarily, yeah.
Any other questions?
You called out a few architectural details. How does this house compare to the rest of the neighborhood? Are these architectural details rare for the neighborhood, or were you just pointing them out because they're nice on the house?
In general, for these reports, I think we always focus on what we see, what's at the house, and how it adds to the character-defining aspects of what is a Spanish
Right.
colonial revival. So, for example, in
The
this
scrolled
photo,
wood balcony was one that
yeah, that
jumped
to
out
me,
at me.
To
so
me, the balcony jumps out, but we've seen, 850 Cumberland, which is not in this neighborhood, has a similar balcony that I think we really like. It's not an unusual feature to have a balcony, but it's definitely something. You've both approved and denied houses with similar balconies over time. To me, when I looked at the house, these windows at the second floor in the lower left photo are the things, I've never seen anything like it. That alone, to me, doesn't make it eligible, but I think it's a really interesting feature, definitely character-defining, definitely something that we would want to protect if we were able to, whether through individual designation or through district. But the other features tend to be, very nice, but more typical just of Spanish colonial revival in general.
Question, Mr. Chair, is the roof tile original?
I can't say. I know the roof was replaced at one point with a permit. Sometimes they reuse tiles and just replace the underlayment. And sometimes they put new tiles up.
Yeah, I had another question. You mentioned in your report the stucco is not original. Now, you also say in page 3, I believe, if the Commission votes to recommend a house of Glendale Registered Mills, I strongly recommend that the removal of existing stucco replacement. Have we ever done that?
A house on Cortez Drive that's owned by Commissioner Shire, actually, the original stucco, or not the stucco was replaced prior to designation, but the Commission took that into consideration when it was looking at it. The earlier stucco that was in place, which was not original, would have been it wasn't the same stucco as this, but it would have put us in the same position of looking at something that really takes away from one of the key character-defining features. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, would you like to come forward? I don't have a card from you. Would you state your name?
My name is Denise Hovey. I haven't had to speak in front of anybody since high school, so I hope I don't trip on my tongue or forget anything important. And thank you for the pretty pictures, because that helps a lot. But first, I'd like to say that my husband and I specifically sought out moving to Glendale because our love is of 20s and 30s style Spanish homes, and we've spent a good part of our 25-year marriage either building or remodeling homes in other parts of Los Angeles, and always trying to be purists and go the extra mile and do the extra homework to make sure that whatever work we did on these houses did keep in tune with the original integrity of a 20s or 30s style Spanish home. So we've done a lot of these houses. We do know what we're doing, and we're very happy to have found this house because not only was it a beautiful house in a great position, it had a good floor plan, and we moved in right away, but had a problem with the balcony that is on the second floor, if you want to show it. We didn't know it at the time that we purchased the house, the front that we're talking about with the beautiful decorated, the front balcony.
Oh, sorry, the front balcony.
The front, that one. It was completely destroyed to dry rot. So we have already completely restored that. And did it to the exact type of corbel and twisted design on the spindles, and I'm sorry, I don't know the right lingo for all the details, but we've already gone forward and done that. And I wanted to bring up that one of the things that Tim Gregory did say to me in his report was that Seth Rice had been the original owner and builder of this house, and that according to him, it is the largest and the most sophisticated of his works yet discovered in the Ross Moines area. And that it has original design of very high integrity, which I hope we're pointing out with some of these details that Mr. Platt's already mentioned. Also, it is the first house south of Mountain facing both Ross Moines and Cortez, and that very large picture window in the living room, which is beveled and recessed, from what we've seen, is the largest one in the neighborhood of this type of Spanish house, and it boasts an incredible view of a historical Spanish house across the street, and also of all the mature landscaping and the twisted road of Cortez. You can go up and down Ross Moines, and not one house has the view that our house has. So it is sitting in a position that, to me, is like a gateway to an important neighborhood. I hope you agree. anyway, a few other things I'd like to go over. Oh, yes, the upstairs 2 windows with the deep insets that we were talking about, with the obtusely angled reveals. I haven't seen anything like that in Ross Moyne. We walk the dogs, we drive around all the time. I haven't seen that on any other house. And we also do have that very pretty entry door with beveled and recessed, and it has original iron on the peak window, as all the windows around the house are original decorative wrought iron. And we also put in this walkway. When we bought the house, there was a cement patio and then pieces of concrete that had been laid in the grass as stepping stones to get to the front door. So we put in the Talavera tile, and the paver is trying to bring up the level of sophistication and beauty to the exterior front of the house. And then the only thing I can add about if there's a natural setting that contributes to the well-being of the people in the city is there is a very large old sycamore tree there that's been well tended by arborists its entire life. It does give a sense of place to the neighborhood. And is there anything else? And I also wanted to point out that those large timbered, what are they called, the lintels above the windows, the casement windows, dining room, kitchen, they add to the beauty and the elegance of the house. So we would really like this house to be part of the historical register, being that we would like to be part of a community that supports trying to be a purist and keeping things original and beautiful, and we support it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I had a question, Mr. Chair. This is in the Ross Moyne district, right?
Proposed.
Proposed. Yeah. Now, we're just starting with the survey now, where we haven't got to that point yet.
Yeah, we don't have a survey yet. We should have that next year.
Thank you.
Commissioners who would like to start his or her comments?
Start if you want, Mr. Chair.
Please do.
I know this area very well. I drive by every day. I know very familiar with the neighborhood. My issue with this house, and I tend to agree with staff, is the stucco. I think the stucco has been replaced. It's not an original treatment of this kind of architecture. Now I may go further and say this whole neighborhood is possessed with a lot of Spanish Revival homes. Basically dominates the area. And the details on those other homes are much superior than this. I know this has a level of integrity, well kept, has beautiful features, but to me, the reason I asked the earlier question, this I think it's a contributor to the neighborhood. I think you're going to have a protection there by when the neighborhood, hopefully the district comes through. So I don't feel that there's any other potential for this house to be, changed any further. And I think with our preservation guidelines, this house will still stay the same way. And my last comment I want to make, in my opinion, I don't think this particular house reaches that level, that specific architecture, especially in that neighborhood. We possess so many beautiful homes with much superior details, and even the one across the street, I think, possesses similar details, but even in my opinion, which is not the case right now, that doesn't even reach the level. But off of Cortez, we have wonderful pieces that I think they're better examples, and at one point, we're going to say, okay, we're going to preserve every Spanish Revival architecture, and that's the trouble I'm having with. Do we go further and preserve every Spanish architecture that has these kind of details? To me, that's the trouble I'm having with, and I'd like to hear what my other commissioners have to say before I make my final decision on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have to agree with Commissioner Mardian on that. It's a beautiful house, and it has neat articulation. That there are so many homes in Rossmoyne that are comparable in many different ways. I mean, I do like the two upper windows and the big round window, and it probably is the biggest in Rossmoyne. I would like to see what I'd said originally is, depending on Seth Rice as the builder architect, if this was his piece de resistance, then it would be more influential to me. But since I don't have that information, I really can't say. I'm happy that they nominated it. I would love to forward it, but it's just, there's just something needed that I can't define right at the moment that would push it over the top.
Thank you.
I think the house is classically representational of the style of house that one sees in Rossmoyne. It is a great representation of the beauty and the character of Rossmoyne. It's always kind of bittersweet to deny an application because obviously you have a lot of pride in your home, and the fact that you restored the balcony is really commendable. And it's homeowners like you that help Glendale maintain the character of their neighborhoods. And so on that score, I would definitely think that this is a very significant contributor to the character of the neighborhood, and I don't know where the process with Rossmoyne stands right now. I hope the historic application is moving forward and it hasn't stalled or anything, but assuming that it is moving forward, it's an essential element of the neighborhood. But I agree with Mr. Platt that when one looks at the criteria, it doesn't meet the criteria for a landmark, and you have to be really conscientious of that. So I agree with my colleagues.
Thank you, Arlene. I do agree with what said before me and support staff report. House is very nice, and I always have difficulty to houses like this. Details, the balcony, the reception, the arch window, everything is so nice. But again, to me, it doesn't reach to the level of being a more, because whatever I wanted to say, it is already said. I would be hesitant for the nomination for this.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up on something that I mentioned earlier? I always like to give the benefit of the doubt to the applicant, and this is a unique case. Let's assume we discuss changing the stucco to a smooth stucco, more period-oriented stucco treatment. Would that make it?
Well, I mean, there is some problems in the back of the house, though we don't see it, but then again, it is our purview to consider that. The back facade is less than to be desired. The windows are not the right ones. Change of stucco really would not be enough for me. I said the house is very nice, but it just does not reach that level if the stucco is changed. Pardon me?
Yes, I agree with that. I think the stucco is one element, but in terms of eligibility, that wouldn't be a deciding factor because the house in its entire architecture is representational of the neighborhood and not rising above the level of representational.
Thank you, Arlene. We want to have... Okay, all right, thank you. So, having said that, I am going to ask for... who would like to make a motion?
Make a motion, Mr. Chair. Regrettably, I mean, this is one of my favorite architecture, but I don't want to be attached sentimentally to these things. I mean, I'm just looking at the criteria. But I do agree with staff, and I'll make the motion that says Historic Commission not recommend 1251 Rossmont Avenue to be designated as a historical resource.
Thank you. Second?
I second, regrettably.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner
for-
Mardian,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
Chairman Amirian.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you for your time.
It's a beautiful house.
It is a beautiful house.
Thank you. Well, we tried.
Yes. And you're not the only one that this happens to.
Bye-bye. Can,
Which way did Desiree go? Back or not?
Take a 5-minute.
yeah, while Desiree is coming,
She's coming.
can we take a 5-minute break? Huh?
You're the commissioner.
Yeah, but
The chair.
I like to have the consensus.
Yes,
Yes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Actually, some of these things become part of the history.
Okay, gentlemen and ladies,
Okay, we are
on.
back. We are going to continue with item number 8, Planning Division updates and informational briefings.
We have a few things to discuss, and this shouldn't take long. One thing I didn't put here that I should have, and Commissioner Vidor brought it up, was just a question about where we are with Ross Moyne Historic District process. An RFP is going to be going out this week for the consultant to come in and do the survey. We're asking to have the responses in November, and we will be making a decision by the end of November. Mid-November, we'll be getting responses, we'll be vetting the applications, or the bids, and then by the end of the month, we should have selected a winning bidder. In terms of the agendized items, I just wanted to let everyone know that we had 3 new Glendale Register listings approved by City Council last week, as well as 3 Mills Act contracts. That would be for the Modern House at 1339 Romulus up on Adams Hill, the Spanish Colonial House, 1461 Royal Boulevard, in the Historic District there. And now I'm going to blank on the third one.
Very
Up here?
modern at the top of Rimcrest.
Not yet. Rimcrest is going because Rimcrest was delayed with the Mills Act being separated. It is a... I had them all in my head just a few hours ago. So.
I can't help you, I was absent last time.
That was just
There were 2 houses on Royal.
Oh, yes.
Merriman?
Ardeven, 1640 Ardeven, the Tudor revival, with all the brick Tudor revival on Ardeven. So those were all unanimously approved, and nice things were said about them by the council. Last month, Commissioner Vidor asked for an update on the Seeley's building. Coincidentally, not long after that, a contractor came in to pull permits for the work he was doing on Seeley's, including bringing us a paint sample for the new paint color that they're selecting, which is an off-white similar to what's there right now. I told them, we don't need to approve this, but I kept it for the record. The concern that I had was that the windows at the second floor on the street facade had been taken out and were kind of open, and it was raining. He says all of those windows are in place on the inside, and they're part of the scope of work to kind of get those cleaned up, fixed up, and reinstalled. Under the agreement we have with the owner, those windows, if they can be reused, are going to be reused, and if they have to be changed out, they're going to be remilled, or new windows would be milled to match the existing up there. So this means that work is moving forward. They're kind of back in action. We learned a little while ago that after they had some financial problems, they came in with the full set of permits because their permit had expired. So they brought the full set of drawings in, which we restamped. Now they have permits for that. And we've actually met with, briefly, the contractor, at least working on part of the project. So with some level of confidence, we can say work is starting up there and should be proceeding. The financing issues all seem to have been resolved. So.
Jay, is this the version where there is an upstairs addition?
Yeah, there's a rooftop addition, and then they're also building out the mezzanine, and they're cutting those new windows on the San Fernando side. The third item we have was just a question for the commissioners. We've talked about how we normally cancel our hearing Thanksgiving week, and then we end up canceling our hearing Christmas week. So looking at the calendar, I was proposing a date of December 6th for a meeting that will cover both months for the end of the year. I just wanted to make sure that we had enough of you available on that date.
Monday again?
Monday, December 6th. Not a problem?
Nope.
Okay, so we will make that official. We'll have to call it a special meeting because it's not on our regular schedule, but otherwise it shouldn't be a problem. And finally, based on our discussion last month, where we raised the issue of how to get a little more visibility for the commission and the work we're doing and have more opportunity to have public kind of interact with the commission, or at least give the public more opportunity, we talked about having an evening meeting that we would do at least once a year. In this case, it would be a meeting where we would call it kind of a year in review sort of thing. So that would be the theme of the meeting. What I was hoping to hear from the commissioners is if you have any ideas about anyone that we would invite, any presentations you would like to see, any specific ideas that you'd like to have discussed. On my end, I thought part of it would be traditional year in review. These are the properties we've designated. These are the historic districts. This is where things stand. These are the numbers. Talk about the Mills Act changes that we've proposed for next year and make that more public so that that comes out. And then I'm totally interested in what you guys have to.
I think you should invite the homeowner association group.
Okay.
What is it? Hugo Woodlands is very much interested in preservation also.
Yes, we could send out invitations to
all of them.
We'll invite every homeowners group so they can spread
It's
word.
going to be on a. We are going to invite them by mail or television or how?
By mail.
By mail.
Yeah, we generally send out. I think do all of our agendas go to all of the homeowners groups generally?
Yes, I believe they do.
Chamber of Commerce.
Well, I mean, it should be, in my opinion, some individual or group who are proponents of historic districting or historical preservation. For example, can we invite someone, a professor from any of the universities who offer those kinds of courses?
You're talking to one.
You are doing that?
Yeah, I teach a class at USC.
Uh-huh.
But we could certainly invite the director of the preservation program at USC. Could invite students to come. We did have one student come. John Locasio is a student in the program, and
John, I think, should come. Not only he's a very interesting speaker, he's also very knowledgeable and also president of the society.
yeah, I think both of our local historical societies we'd like to invite, definitely, and perhaps allow to make presentations about the work they've been doing over the last year.
But if you make a presentation, you will be wearing two hats. If you do, I would like you to say and announce, or we announce that you are also a professor.
Oh,
Or-
no, I don't think I should make a presentation.
But if, but if we bring someone else as a professor or teacher at the university, might have a different impact.
Perhaps a professor of urban design, Professor Loomis.
Chairman Amirian, I think just thinking out loud off of your comments, from time to time we have done training sessions on particular topics with the commissions, and this might be a good opportunity to invite somebody to do a training session that would be of value to the commissioners in terms of helping you think about preservation issues, but might also be educational for the broader community that might be watching or attending the meeting. Off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of what they might be, but we've had conversations, I think, about historic landscapes in the past or the relevance of people and the
Significance of the
houses.
person,
So there might be an opportunity to think about inviting somebody who could speak in that fashion, but might have a broader interest to the community.
If the subject is such that, or the presentation is such that audience captivated, that would be more interesting rather than the training. We could do that on our own.
Right. I think if you have any interest in bringing somebody in, I'd love to hear some suggestions if there are people you've thought of that we should contact. For example, the Transportation Parking Commission, their last meeting had invited Professor Don Shoup, who's from UCLA and does a lot of work on parking. They invited him to come to speak about what his research on parking and charging for parking, what that research has led to. And that was a pretty engaging discussion for them. That was very academic, obviously.
There is a practitioner in Pasadena by the name of Polizaides.
Yes.
Is that right?
I know him very well.
He's a very good speaker. I don't know what's...
Well, he set foot
I
in
could talk to
Glendale.
him.
Anyway, this was just an idea. We don't have to choose one person. I might not know anyone, but you could think about it.
Well, one thought I've had thinking about this is I think it would be great for the commissioners themselves to do most of these updates and maybe select 5 topics, whether it's districts, individual nominations, projects, design review, to kind of run through, so that it wouldn't be just kind of more a report, it would be more personal, everyone could get to meet individual commissioners and have presentations. So without putting anyone on the spot now, I thought if we all agree to kind of a format, we can individually talk about which aspects of the evening you'd like to focus on personally, try to work that out so we get kind of a nice range of topics.
Add one more thing, Mr. Chair. I think it's very important to educate our real estate.
Yes.
Those are the ones who stand and bring in people. That's it. I think, because I spoke with Jay on a couple of occasions, was Prudential, and some of the agents didn't even know we had historical. I don't know if you recall that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good idea to educate, because they have a larger. That agency, I think, had 500 agents working for them. That's a good idea also to invite those people.
I don't remember which department. It might be either public. It may be the planning department. I can't remember. There was a memo sent out looking for outreach from the community, homeowners associations, and organizations for a new initiative in the city of Glendale with the whole green sustainability thing, and they were seeking input about, there was to be some type of discussion about how preservation factors into that. And is that something that should be a discussion, how sustainability and preservation complement each other?
I think we could look into doing a kind of topic on that. Might be a good opportunity for one of these guest speakers, perhaps. But to answer the more specific question, the planning department, planning division is sort of heading up a kind of summary process of all of our green initiatives citywide, and is doing some outreach. I believe there's just informational, I believe later this month, or in November, I believe is when we're scheduled to take a report to the council. That's kind of like the report card of where we are now. Not necessarily what we plan to do, but just so we know what we're
Right.
On that, Mr. Chair, there was a green task force created a while back. We met, I think, 3-4 times. Stephanie Wright was
right.
planning department, also Hassan. I think there's a report coming up too. Is that the same one you're mentioning?
No, there are two different reports. There's on the one hand was a report about green building standards. That went about 2 weeks ago to an afternoon joint meeting of the council and agency and housing authority. This other one is a more comprehensive look at sustainability and green programs citywide. That would include things other like recycling efforts and things that go well beyond just green building. Energy issues, some of the programs GWP has, and that's going to be a report card set of kind of where we are, what standards and practices we have in place. That's going mid-November. Before Thanksgiving, I think is when it's...
Very good topic, I think. Our green building code is effective January. There's mandatory measures that they have to take. Or
And what I could look into, talk to people in the community to see if there's someone locally who actually has enough knowledge to kind of give us a presentation about that. I think that would be an interesting topic. In preservation right now, it's kind of a cutting edge. It's kind of the new direction the preservation movement's focusing on right now. So there are plenty of people who are able to do that. I'll be attending the National Trust Conference this week in Austin, and that's a huge, many of the sessions, including an entire track, are devoted to that. So I'll probably be hitting a few of those and maybe really do that for us. So.
Okay, how would we know that? The agenda. Are you going to prepare something and send us to comment, or this is enough and you will?
If you all agree to tackle a subject, what I thought I would do is work with Alan. We'll put together a list of the various things and ask for volunteers. First come, first serve, probably. So everyone who feels comfortable with one of the topics, and then I'll work with you directly because a lot of it, there'll be photos, there'll be numbers, and work to make this kind of a nice presentation. And then we'll also be hearing any items that come forward to us. So it'll also be a regular meeting. So it'll be part of the meeting that we're doing wrap up for the year.
You have to be cognizant also of the time. 5 of us.
Yeah, I'll be very careful agendizing things.
We can't make the audience bored. We have to excite them. Less talk, but
More pictures.
That's right.
Visually rich is the way we like to refer to it in the department.
say it again.
Visually rich.
Visually rich.
Which of you can sing? Doggerel verse.
I'd be interested in presenting on those nominations that had been added to the Historic Register.
Okay.
Interested talking about the design guidelines, if you wish.
We'll also we've had a very limited number of properties come through in the last year for design review, but we have had a few large-scale examples like Sealy's. Well, Sealy's wasn't this year, but
Alex?
maybe it was.
Alex Theater Evaluation.
The Alex, and then I'm thinking specifically of the Masonic Temple, which is moving forward. And I think that would be an interesting role model to talk about the thought process as we apply the guidelines.
Maybe we should
Actually, not the guidelines, just doing design review.
Maybe we should include the Sealy building because that kind of died for a while. We need to bring it up.
If I may, it strikes me that we may want to even include a couple of the kind of major signature projects like the Alex, the Sealy's, the Masonic Temple. Maybe that's a good opportunity to bring Brand Library onto the table and talk about where that's at. Since we'll have hopefully a big community audience, we could highlight some of the major preservation projects.
I'd be happy to talk about a topic related to commercial structures. So
in terms of design review on commercial structures?
Well, obviously, we have to narrow it down to something, so whatever the commission feels is the most relevant aspect of commercial projects, I would be willing to talk on that subject. It's near and dear to my heart.
Well, I would think in the last year it would be design review. We haven't designated any commercial buildings in the last year. So I think talking about design review, good. And that might be a big enough issue since we have several. We could split that up among a couple of you.
Sure.
Now we have new nominations with Desiree. Mardian talking about design guidelines in historic districts and how those have applied, and we have a few concrete examples share of that kind of work. Commissioner Vidor talking about design review for commercial buildings.
Or I think my interest is really, the whole commercial piece in terms of historic designation and, maybe talking about what, we have a lot of focus on residential architecture, and is there some way we can focus on what the requirements are and what the criteria are for commercial structures?
They're all the same, so.
Seem to.
Why don't you think about it, give it some thought, and see if you can come up with an angle that would be interesting.
Don't look at me. I don't know yet. So I'll let you know.
Mike?
I don't know yet. I'll have to think about it.
So we'll do a little more brainstorming in the office and ideas. And
I think maybe we could also bring back a kind of advanced agenda at our next meeting, the special meeting we just set up on December 6th, and just kind of put a draft agenda in front of the commission and see if that's looking right, if we're missing things, and we can fine-tune it a little more at our next meeting.
Okay. Okay, very good. That was the last item. Any other things you'd like to talk about or suggest, or shall we adjourn? We adjourn.
I would like to, though, before we adjourn, just to adjourn in the memory of Charles Bosbeck and Sid Gordon.
We adjourn now.